Hello, and one more time, thank you for being here with us. Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to one more Extraordinary Women in Tech. Today's topic is design, storytelling, and social responsibility. This roundtable will take approximately 45 minutes, leaving 15 minutes for questions. I will ask you to please write your questions at any time using the Q&A button. For today, our host is Holly Campones. So let's get started. Holly, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Manuela, and thank you to everyone joining us today. I'm so excited to share this topic and this panel with you. We have three extraordinarily talented and thoughtful women joining us today, and I'd like to let them introduce themselves to you in their own words. So, Barbara, will you start us off?
Sure. So thanks for having me here today. I'm very honored to be here with this group of amazing women. So I'm Barbara. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm currently a design director at Logi, a Brazilian startup. And I have a background that goes from tech consultancy to entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and working with groups from favelas.
Amazing. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for joining us. And Leslie, will you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon or good morning, good night to everyone. My name is Leslie Ann Noel, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, but I am in New Orleans at the moment, where I'm the Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact. I am always very honored to be invited to talk about anything in tech, because I don't actually see myself as a tech person, but I do have a background in industrial design, and now I work in this area of design thinking.
Amazing. Thank you. It's a privilege to have you with us. And last but not least, Yasi, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Yasi Bayani. I'm currently co-founder of Raya Capital, which is a consultancy and investment firm. And my background is in product management. I've been in various product leadership roles. And in some of those roles, I've been also responsible for the design teams. So my focus has been primarily tech and digital health.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Yasi. So to kick it off today, I wanted to start with a fun question. And this is just a little bit imaginative, get the creative juices flowing here. We're going to talk about some serious topics today. So I wanted to start out with something a little bit lighter and more fun. And so the question that I have for each one of the panelists today is, if you could study design in any medium and become proficient in it, what would it be and why? Leslie, I'll start with you.
I really like ceramics. So I did industrial design, and I'm very tactile, and I don't get the opportunity to do this anymore. So actually, if I could do anything today, I'd do ceramics, because there's some real joy in getting dirty and making this beautiful object from mud, which is kind of has no value. So that's where I'd go.
I love that. Amazing. How about you, Yasi?
I wish I could get my kid's magic wand, do things that in reality we all wanted to. I wanted that to be able to create things that I want. So that would be my design tool, to be able to have the magic wand be functional.
I love that. Barbara, what about you?
This is a hard question. Like, I really like design in all its forms, but I really enjoy visiting museums. So I might do something related to exhibition design, or even working with artwork, like restoration, something, just helping art, just helping people to have a great experience when visiting those places.
That's lovely. I love it. So much creative energy already going on here in this group. I think for myself, if I could just, snap my fingers and become proficient in any medium, or more realistically have the time to dedicate it, it would be watercolor. My grandmother is an amazing watercolorist, and I love her paintings because the things that you normally just take for granted as being clear cut, suddenly there's some wiggle room and things are a little bit more nuanced. So I love how watercolor just challenges us to think a little bit differently about the everyday objects and things in our lives. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. And, I think let's go ahead and jump right into our panel questions. So for each of us here, this topic is really close to our hearts. And I'm really excited. I think in some ways, this is the most diverse group of people we've had in one of our webinars yet. And incredible perspectives to share, incredible experience and leadership. So we're going to get into some deep topics and just encourage those of you in the audience, please share your questions. We want to engage with you throughout the webinar as well as in the end in the Q&A section. So let's get right into it. When we think about design and social justice, a lot of the time our minds go straight to representation. So let's talk a little bit about representation and why is it important. Yasi, will you start us off?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when I think about representation, it's more about kind of inclusion and having people from different backgrounds kind of part of that discussion, part of that activity. And when we think about inclusion, there are many different ways to think about that, and also diversity. Like some of the more obvious ones, of course, are like race and kind of ethnicity and background, but also age, disability, what kind of family background and social background you come from. There's so many layers of kind of diversity we need to consider when we are talking about this. So gender, one of the most important ones. So when we think about representation, we wanted to have representation from very different groups. And why this is important, first of all, when you think about it from like business perspective, it's been various researches that show that when you have diverse group of people participate in the conversations, it actually helped with the bottom line and performance of the companies in terms of financials. But also it's just important to have different group of people participate in this conversation and have their inputs and the way that they see the world being incorporated to any activity we are doing.
I love that, Yasi. I think it's many times we don't realize that the right thing to do that benefits the most people is also a very practical thing to do that's going to benefit a company's bottom line. And we tend to make those things opposed to each other when in reality, it can only strengthen us to have greater representation. Leslie, what are your thoughts on representation and why it's so important?
So I would echo some of what Yasi said. Having a diverse group of people or diverse group of voices, it enriches these conversations that we're having, whether it's around specific design items that we're trying to create or systems that we're trying to change. The diversity of the group helps us see the problems from angles that we might not have considered before. And so that's like, if we think about why do we need these diverse spaces, it's so that we can get a more complex understanding of a lot of the things that we're dealing with or we're designing. And then diversity leads to more diversity. If the spaces are diverse, then more people will feel comfortable in participating, and, like Yasi said, if companies want to be doing better in general, whether it's financial or doing better work, the more diverse these discussions are, the more comfortable other people, well, I don't know who's other, but, the more comfortable people who don't think that they are adequately represented, the more comfortable they're going to feel in participating in conversations in general.
That's amazing. I hear you getting at a lot about identity and, who is this for when we're creating products or services. So I think that's such an important point that we really want it to be for many different people, many different perspectives, and getting that fuller sense of the true picture of the demographic or even just the world that we're living in. Thank you. And, right alongside that, it's hard to talk about representation without talking about diversity. And I think we're long overdue for this. In the last several months, we've seen many more companies suddenly caring a lot about diversity and inclusion. And in many ways, it's a very good step to see that. But I also want to ask, where do these initiatives fall short? And what are some of the common assumptions behind them? And Leslie, can we start with you?
Yeah, so inclusion, diversity and inclusion initiatives are wonderful, and they start me on a track that I get a little bit heated sometimes, because even the word inclusion to me suggests that that there's still a narrative that's controlled by a dominant group, and okay, we'll include you into our story. And so I struggle with the whole diversity and inclusion title, and I really think that we're trying to see how are we creating spaces where multiple perspectives are encouraged, where people can feel that they are not just being included into a discussion, but they're really bringing, there can be many different positions in this discussion, not this one counter position to the dominant narrative. So for me, I struggle with inclusion, and I'm really more interested in pluriversality or multiplicity. And how, that's a question that I ask people who are doing diversity and inclusion initiatives. How are you shaking things up so it's not just one dominant narrative that everyone else is trying to be included in?
Do you think that that's also related to making sure to avoid tokenism?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that is one way that they fall short. I think. And then when you have that situation of tokenism, you really do have sometimes a situation where the person who is unfortunately the token really is not going to bring their perspective in, because it's just not a welcoming space. And so I'm very interested in how are we creating these really diverse spaces where people can bring their complete selves. I know that sounds like a cliche, but how can we get these spaces where people aren't feeling that their perspective is othered, and move to spaces where there are many other positions that are, everybody's position is other, and we are welcoming all of these other positions.
Yeah, maybe that there's not one default way of looking, but that all of them are equally valid. I love it. Barbara, what do you think about diversity and inclusion, and how can we do better?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Leslie regarding the diversity and the inclusion, how we approach that. I find that many of the initiatives that the companies usually like to advertise about, they are very short term. And they can easily fall on the tokenism side of things. And if you really want to have a diverse company, you need to think about your environment and how welcoming it is. So it doesn't matter if you're doing I don't know, some recruitment focus on LGBT people. If when this group of people is joining your company, you're going to have a homophobic environment, and you have coworkers who are not open or who are not ready to embrace it. So I think this is the main thing when it comes to inclusion. It's not just bringing a group to burst your own bubble. It's not about you, right? It's about how the other how the group, not others, but how this group might feel when it joins your environment.
That's such a great point. And I think you're right. We really do a disservice when we bring in people to be the token or to represent what we had considered previously an other point of view, without laying the groundwork and ensuring that it's going to be a welcoming space, and a space where they really truly have a voice and a seat at the table. Thank you for bringing that. Yasi, what are your thoughts? I know you've seen many of these initiatives in your time in leadership. Where did they fall short, and what are some of the assumptions behind them?
Yeah, I think I echo what has already been mentioned. I think the inclusion part is really important, and what I think all of us are feeling is great to have kind of diversity and inclusion initiatives. And as one of the Harvard Business Reviews mentioned, diversity doesn't stick without inclusion. And when we talk about diversity is who's in the team, and when we talk about inclusion is who's in the game, who's in the discussion. And we really want more people to be part of discussion. And the only way you do that is, first of all, I think each individual, all of us, every other people, try to really watch for their own unconscious biases towards different groups, different backgrounds, different genders, and really watch for that and try to fix that first. We need to all start from ourselves before we try to change the world. And as we do that, really allow more conversations and others' point of views become more of a norm and have more capacity and tolerance for hearing them and really take action towards them. Because I think it's easy to say, we have diverse group of people in the team, or we have different conversations in inclusion, but if we don't really take them in and apply them and really respect those opinions and diverse way of thinking and seeing the world, it still won't be as effective.
Yeah, that's a great point. Not as effective and maybe even damaging, because we may make cynics of those that are trying to bring those perspectives and get in the game. Great point.
I wanted to just add to what Yassi is saying. There is a bit that sometimes companies talk about, which is belonging. So after the diversity and the inclusion, there's that other bit of the belonging, because like what you were saying earlier about the tokenism, yes, you can bring in the token person, but if they're not feeling welcome, then as you just said, it's damaging to them, to the company culture. And if companies really do that extra bit and see, okay, how are we going to create structures that make diverse teams feel, members from different backgrounds feel welcome in the conversation, they'll do much better in these DEI initiatives.
Let me ask you about that a little further. Have you seen this done well, or what are some practices that companies could think about? Leslie, I'll start with you, but I'm curious to hear from any of the three of you.
So actually, I was in a situation once where we were talking about hiring, and someone within our team said that you have to hire in multiples. It sounds strange to place it like that, but because if you are trying to change a culture, you really do need, you can't expect sometimes this one token individual to change a culture. But if you are trying to change a culture and you are thinking of things of group hires, that is one way of creating environments to help people, help teams go through this kind of DEI, help teams become more diverse and more welcoming. And then I would say also mentorship, because people coming in from different backgrounds, from different levels of exclusion, whether it's visible or not visible, people, I'll say we sometimes need the support to maneuver these systems that we're not comfortable with, and therefore mentorship would really help that experience.
It's a great point. I see completely what you're saying with the mentorship, and the multiples really make sense as well, because if you think about it, it can alleviate a lot of pressure off of one individual if they're not the only one, the token one in the group. Yassi, what do you think about that? What's been done well?
Yeah, I think I've seen instances of it done well, but I think at kind of mass level, we still have a lot of work to do as every team, organization, every group, because of all the unconscious biases we all have, and we just have to be consciously try to remove them. A few ways that I've seen it done well is, first of all, in environments that are very much merit-based. So every voice matter if they have the good point to bring up or the data to support the conversation, and really doesn't matter what's the hierarchy, what's people's background. So I really encourage people from different backgrounds bring data to any conversation, because particularly data becomes a lot more important tool to use in the new world and new era. So I think it provides credibility for people with different backgrounds when they back up their point of view with data. And that then opens up and give those groups more kind of wins and more credibility, which then opens up more inclusive conversations and more trust and credibility, which is really important for these types of conversations. So I've seen that being well. And then I've seen it in different teams, the kind of diversity and inclusion have been at least of a good conversation when it's very genuine. Like if the leader or if the group really genuinely wants to become more inclusive, they genuinely wanted to make a change, there has been more progress done. If it's just like a checkbox on the HR or any kind of company initiatives, it's just so much harder to see them being impactful, because at the end of the day, all of these are effective if we as people put them in practice, and we will put them in practice if we genuinely care about them.
That's such a great point. Thank you for that. And I like the point about data. I know you've mentored me with that personally, and I've seen, what a great neutralizing force data is. You can't ignore it no matter where it comes from. Barbara, what about you? What are some ways that companies can do that well?
So I was trying to think about something that I could add, and I think one of the most important points is it's not only your company or it's not only your team that is not diverse enough, right? So we are talking about a whole market that is not encouraging for anyone who does not follow a norm, right? So I think it's very important for people to think about how central they are to something. So I think any initiative that might be good for a collaborative perspective, or to understand that when your company is trying to do something to encourage people to register for a job or something with you, you're not just only impacting your company or your specific team, you're doing something for the whole market. So I still see these days companies who are very secret about their initiative and they don't like sharing. I think the only way possible for us to close gender gap, to work all these issues, is if we work as one, if we all acknowledge that it's not only a company, it's the whole system that should be, we should rethink how we are approaching all this. So initiatives like Leslie mentioned, like mentorship, you shouldn't have a mentorship program that it's only focused in your company or in a specific area. Like it's not only mentorship for women to become engineers, should also be mentorship for people of color to be able to join your finance team, right? So it's something that should be broad, like initiatives that are broader would be my my tip here in this topic.
That's great. I think it raises a really important point, which is about blind spots. It seems that often we discover, oh, we were overlooking X, and then we'll focus all our efforts on correcting X, like bringing women into the engineering world, but there's still so many blind spots that we don't see. And I think for a long time, one of those blind spots was accessibility in design, right? And finally, we start to see some more traction around this in the last several years. But I wonder, in your perspective, Barbara, where do we improve from here? Where do we still have blind spots around who enjoys our design work and how they enjoy it?
Yeah, well, I think that at this point of our century, you can't say anymore that there's a lack of resources and there's a lack of information regarding the subject, or that people with disabilities are still invisible to the society. You have social media, you have information all the time. So we know that these people exist and that they are part of the society, right? So we have laws, we have World Wide Web Consortium with great rules to help us to build things. So I think that the most important thing, and then I might be just repeating myself, but we need to hire those people to be part of the team as well. It doesn't make much sense for you to focus, oh, well, we're a company and then focus on accessibility. Okay, how many people with side issues you have in your company, or how I don't know, people with many types of disability, are you bringing them to the conversation? Are they being active in the conversation when we are developing and creating those products, right? So it's not just about hearing. People are out there and they are saying a lot of things, but we need them to be part of the construction of the new tools that we are bringing. And also, it would be good to if we could, and then talking a little bit more about design process, is it's way easier to create something that is accessible to everyone if you focus on the edge cases, right? So if you build something thinking about the 20% of people who are visually impaired, I'm quite sure you'll be doing some color contrast adjustments, some font size, things that for a designer is not, it shouldn't be hard to think, it shouldn't be hard to conceive. And if you build this for these people to be able to read, people with regular vision will be able to access as well. So when you build something for the edges, when you build something for people who live here, you're actually covering a much higher a path, like you're being broader in your achievements. And last, I would say that we shouldn't assume anything. So just to make sure that when we hire someone and then we build the edge cases, just don't assume that things are right. Just don't assume that everyone will be able to understand what you're trying to design. Test it, go outside, find a group that that is able to reinforce the things that you're doing, and make sure that you are doing the best you can.
That's great, Barbara. And I think you make such a good point about improving the experience for the edge cases actually is of benefit to everyone, and it speaks to everyone. So I think that's such a good reminder. Again, there's sort of a poor assumption that we pit two things against each other, when in reality they're just so complementary. And Yasi, I know you're very much in this world. You've been part of a lot of product ideation and development. What do you think is still overlooked commonly in a product ideation process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wanted to talk about this in two very different ways. One is about the kind of process and inclusion, and one in some ways, I don't want to say exclusion, but focus of target group of customers you're addressing a problem for. So let's talk about the process of design and product development. I think we could probably do a much better job of bringing more people even within the company or during the ideation and testing various concepts to be more inclusive. As Barbara mentioned, a lot of times we go and do user research. We go and do talk with customers as part of our customer discovery process. But oftentimes we just target group of people who we wanted to address a solution for. And maybe we go a little bit higher in terms of like age diversity or gender diversity or socioeconomical diversity. I think we could include more variables into those discussions to make sure we really cover a broad range of group of people in the user research and customer discovery. So basically think of our customers probably as a broader group of people. We could definitely do a better job. Also within the companies as part of the ideation, a lot of time product manager, designers, maybe engineers are part of a lot of the brainstormings. We don't really think about functional diversity. Maybe we sometimes bring business people, but we really don't necessarily think about all the diversity of perspectives that are also part of this discussions early on that we could probably tap on. So again, like, could we be more inclusive as part of those discussions and bring people from different parts of the company, but also different backgrounds into those brainstorming and early kind of ideation process? I think we could do a better job. But on a very, very totally different way to answer that also, I would say when you are building a product or designing a solution, you also really need to speak to that customer and clientele. So you need to understand who you're designing for. For instance, I can give you an example. At Fitbit, we built a female health product, and our designer on the product was a man. He spent a lot of time empathizing with women, understand women's problem around cycles, fertility, and all these other topics in order for him to be able to design. So I think it's important to, if you're knowing that you're designing a solution for a particular group of people or particular problem, really empathize with those group of people to really understand their pain points. And as a designer, as a product developers, it's our jobs to really connect with that specific groups if we know we are designing something for a specific group, and really help to design it for them versus for the universe.
Yeah. And I think what's really neat about what you're getting at here, Yasi, and you as well, Barbara, is that these are just good design best practices to cultivate empathy for your users, to conduct user research, to test and validate and continue to polish. So it's really nothing so radical. It's just employing those practices in a broader scope and including that group that's wider than what we often think about. Thank you for bringing those perspectives. The next question that I want to ask, this is something that I'm personally really passionate about and kind of why I wanted to host this webinar. So when I think about unconscious assumptions or biases that I hold, I can often trace them back to stories, both visual and verbal, that I absorbed as a young child. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship between design and storytelling and how the stories that we tell and absorb shape our reality and how powerful that can be. So Leslie, would you care to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So for me, it's been really interesting to see like the rise of people talking about storytelling in design. I think that we probably always use stories, but I think that people are now very explicit about talking about storytelling more. But I get it. You know, we use storytelling in design where we use metaphors a lot. And we use metaphors for inspiration. We use storytelling in the empathy work that we do to help us understand other people better and for us to help communicate better with other people. You know, that's another place that we use storytelling to get other people on board. You know, like I worked in advertising very, very, in a previous life. And, really, we did use a lot of this storytelling to get other people interested in the products that we were selling. So I think that storytelling is very essential to the work that we do. I've actually, I teach design, right? And I actually brought in a filmmaker as a guest lecturer once to get students to understand better, how do we understand these stories better? How do we get enough information so we're doing research that's deep enough for us to then be able to tell a story. So it was really interesting to see how the research changed, because first the students did interviews with their target audience. And then when the filmmaker asked them questions, they couldn't answer any of the questions because they weren't trying to tell a story. They were just doing the interview that they thought they had to do. And then after, when they had the assignment of trying to recreate a story, they really did even that interview, that research part of it in a much better way. One thing I wanted to add to what Barbara and Yasi were saying in the previous question, because I think it's related as well to the storytelling, is I now start my semester where I ask people to think about who they are, and what's happening with the team, who are the people in the room, because I think that all of that also becomes part of the story, so like the story or the research that I do as a Black woman from the Caribbean is going to be different to the story or the research that a male colleague will do. It helps us to see who the team is composed of, and then maybe why we're doing the work that in the way that we're doing, why we're telling the stories that we're telling.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. And I think it points to just how compelling that is, and particularly when you're grounded in a place of context. Thank you for sharing that. Barbara, what are your thoughts on storytelling and design and how that really contributes to the way that we view reality?
I think a very important point to make here is that when you are communicating, when we are here talking to each other and talking to an audience, it's not only about what we are trying to tell and what we want to tell, but it's also about what other people are actually hearing from us. So communication is always this two-way road, right? So I think regarding storytelling, it's not only about what story is being told, but also who is telling that story. So if you look at our history books, at least until today, it's mostly written by white educated men. So if you go to school, at least in Brazil, the story you will hear, it's very much about, it has a strong colonialist background and very European centric. So I usually wonder how a story would look if it was written by women. Let's not be radical and say only women, but if at least 50% of the writers were women, what kinds of stories we will be telling? Because when you tell a story, it's also about how you position your perspective. And when you tell something, the words you use and all the narrative is shaped by everything you have lived so far, right? So everything we're talking here today was shaped by our past experiences. So the same happens with a story, because usually storytelling is related to oral culture. So when you are telling a story, you're not reading something, you are remembering something, and the things you choose to remember are the things that were made a mark in your past, and this has a lot to do with who is telling the story. So making a point and connecting the previous questions is about having a very diverse audience, but also having a very diverse set of storytellers. So when you talk about design and you want to build something, you want to hear the stories that other people, that your user is trying to tell you, so you can help them with the best tool, you can help them with the best service. And not only hear your fellow colleagues, they might come from the same university, they might have the same background. You need to have a broader audience and a broader perspective.
I absolutely love that. I think you make such a good point. And, you know, like even as women, I think when we hear stories that are told from a primarily male perspective, we absorb ideas about ourselves as women and what it means to be women that stay with us and many times need to be unlearned consciously throughout our lifetimes. So it's really exciting to think about what the world would be like if our storytellers were more diverse and represented more genders, more races, more cultures, more ethnicities. That's really exciting. I think it's a good motivation for all of us on the call, all of us listening, to think about how do we cultivate storytelling within diverse people in our network, and how do we coach them and raise them up.
Yeah, I keep jumping in. I had an interesting conversation literally like an hour before this call, where someone was, so there's a West African character called Anansi, very popular throughout the African diaspora. And so on this call, someone was telling me, oh yes, and we're using Anansi to tell stories about health. And I thought it was interesting that I then replied to the person, I've actually done a little bit less storytelling since I've moved to the US. And so that to me made me think about also another call for the diversity, because different cultures use stories in different ways. So, you know, if we are having these really diverse teams, then even that becomes an opportunity for us to think of different ways of using this skill of storytelling.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And Yassi, is there anything you want to add on this? I think this is just a great question.
Not anything beyond what has been said.
Hey, okay. Well, I know we're already coming up on the Q&A, so I just want to ask a couple more questions. And you know, I think one of the questions I'd like to talk about is, usually when we see systemic injustice in our society, we can talk about, you know, any given society, but I think what's common is that it's held up by social narratives. And I want to ask, how can design help us to challenge and even dismantle those narratives? And do we have any examples? So Barbara, can I start with you?
Sure. So let me try to get an example from my past. So I had a project in Rio 5 or 7 or 10 years ago. It was an entrepreneurship program, basically working with people who lived in favelas or people who lived in peripheral neighborhoods. So the idea was to build businesses from many different kinds using design thinking and other cool tools that people were using in the rich zones with people who could not afford those kind of very expensive courses, or even traveling abroad to have this kind of education. So I think this was really a way of trying to reset those tools and trying to find new ways of working with design and helping those people to tell their stories. So we were not used, let's say, a canvas exactly the way it was planned to be used on Silicon Valley. We would try to do some adjustments so people could feel they built something that was not only able to help them with their own businesses, but also to help other people, other batches that would come after them. So I think this was a good way of working, some sort of almost like a meta design, something that you do for design and something that helps change the narrative. I think that was really, really important. We had an amazing impact, and it's a project I'm very proud of.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we're gonna do speed round, the last few questions. So Leslie, I'm gonna give this one to you. What are some of the more common ways that design and designers inadvertently center the concerns of more dominant or oppressive groups over marginalized ones? And how can we encourage our designers and storytellers to be more thoughtful about this?
I'm sorry about that. Yes, you said rapid, and I can't think of rapid. So ways that we center the concerns of that we can center the concerns of oppressive groups over marginalized groups. I think sometimes when we buy into to conversations about modernity, capitalism, there are some discourses that really focus on money over people. And for me, I think that I think that focus often takes us away from the needs of the people who are most affected or least served by systems. And so the opposite then in the design is that, and then I have the luxury of doing this, of course, in a university. I am asking students always to think of, okay, who is least well served and how can they be served better, by this product, by this system. And how can we also include more of these people in the design process, in the conversations, in the research, so that we are centering. It could be them or it could be us. We all have different marginal identities, but how do we then, through the composition of the groups that are involved in the process, we can serve people better.
That's fantastic. It all goes back to giving them an equal seat at the table, I think. That's great. Okay, and Yasi, for you, I think many of our listeners today are working in software companies, and they may feel that their day-to-day design work is abstract or not closely related to broader injustice in the world. So how can designers in these scenarios connect their day-to-day work with causes that they care about?
Sure. So I think if there's some specific areas that they care about that is not necessarily related to their day-to-day job, I think it's important to try to support them. Maybe they can do some design work for them for free or anything of that sort. But ideally, I think there's so many opportunities in day-to-day for all of us to be more inclusive, to bring some of the things we care about to more of an attention of ourselves and other people. So I think the way I think about it around some of these topics is in every meeting, every conversation, every discussion, there's more opportunities to improve inclusion, diversity, either as hiring or conversations or brainstorming or making sure that we are more respectful of other people's opinion, or we recognize that that point of view came from the other side of the room, which might be different than us, maybe a woman that brought up a point in a large meeting with men, and give them credit for that good idea. All of those little things brings. I think there are opportunities for all of us in different roles, would it be design or any other role, to be honest with you, to be very active and proactive about making small improvements day to day. So I think having that lens to look for every opportunity, I think is one of the best ways we all can push the boundaries. But of course, if there's some, particular initiative that someone cares about that is, very much outside of their day-to-day job, it's good to also proactively find them and support them.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Yossi. And final question before we go to the Q&A. So we'll go quickly to each of you. All three of you are women in leadership positions, and you have opportunity to influence your colleagues and your teams and your students. So what is our responsibility as women in leadership when it comes to empowering our designers and storytellers? Yossi, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think walk the walk to be good role models, ourselves respect different point of views, really watch our own unconscious biases. Like I personally try to really pay attention to my consciousness, to the point that you brought up earlier. The way that we've been raised and the way that things that we've been exposed to very much shape who we are. So many of us have to very proactively take some steps to change that. So doing that is important, and also proactively bring other people to the discussion, particularly people in leadership position and professors. Like we need to make sure the voices that are not typically heard, we bring them to the conversation and let them to be heard.
Great. Barbara?
Sure. Totally agree, Yossi. Be a role model. People will be looking at you. Be there for people. Be there for other women. You need to have this mentor behavior. You need to help people to, you want people by your side. You want more women by your side. You want more LGBT people by your side. So be this role model, and be patient. We have different backgrounds. We have different ways of learning. So be patient when you embrace these groups, and just be there. Believe in each other. I think it's important.
Beautiful. Leslie?
So I work with students and I work with community participants. And so part of my responsibility is to learn from them and create spaces where they can grow, they can thrive. So, really my small student team who I work with, I'm always trying to create opportunities for them to really get some spotlight on themselves. I'm not trying to hog every opportunity. So I think that our responsibility is also to lift other people up and make sure that they get, we transfer some of the power that we automatically get because of the leadership to other people around us.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. We have some great questions here. So first one is from Alini. She says, I've been in IT for 11 years now. I think I've always been treated fairly in general, but as a woman, I feel I always have to prove myself, prove that I can be as good as a man. I feel colleagues doubt my skills more than they doubt the skills of male coworkers. I'm afraid to talk about it and be seen as a victim. How do you think I could bring this?
I have some thoughts about that. I think the first most important thing is to really try to get that outside of your head, because I would get that a lot of it could be your own perception versus like the reality. And the more you believe that your work is not as important and as other people, it actually kind of reflects that. Like people can sense your energy, and then all of a sudden they feel like, yes, your work is not as important. So really truly believe in yourself, your work. And again, with data, with getting inputs early on from people who matter, maybe you can have one-on-one session with people, get their inputs. Maybe you can have one-on-one larger meetings with your boss or whoever that their voice matters in your organization. Get the inputs in advance, so when you're presenting to the larger groups, you come across very confident and know that your work matter.
I would also say that it's not your job to change them. So make sure to focus in your career. I mean, you are a senior developer, right? You have 11 years of experience. I mean, you might not be a developer, you have 11 years of experience in the area. So make sure that you are being heard and do not target the behavior, right? Because again, it's not your job, but make sure the things that you are saying and the things that you're trying to make are reaching the right audience.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that when I'm dealing with my own imposter syndrome, I find collaborators who respect me. You know, it might not, even if it's not in the work scenario, I'm seeking people who, where I don't have to prove myself all the time. You know, like if you could find, whether it's a passion project or something like that, where you are respected and your work is being validated, that will compensate for the kind of aggressive situation that you might be. And I'd agree with Yasi that sometimes it is internal, that we have to learn how to get it out of our heads as well.
It's a great question, Alini. Thank you for asking. I know you're certainly not alone in having felt that. Next question is from Kay. And Kay asks, how do you include the least served audience when it doesn't align with business goals? A great question. Any volunteers for this one?
I want to start with something. Sorry, Yasi, I just kind of jumped in. And I'm just going to say like a sentence and then pass it over to you. The idea that it doesn't align with business goals, I think, is a fallacy, because actually it does, you know. And if we come back to what Barbara was saying earlier, if we serve the people with the least access, we're serving a much wider group of people. So, you know, for people to think that, you know, that it doesn't align with their goals is wrong. And maybe Yasi can be very much more articulate than I can.
No, that's great. Exactly. That's how I kind of think about it. My question was like, why it's not aligned with the business goals. Like, you know, I like to know more, because sometimes, yes, it might make sense, or the company's budget might be very limited. You're in a startup mode, so you need to really focus on particular problem or group of people. But I think the question is very high level. So generally speaking, I think that statement could be challenged, right? But there's some nuances, I'm sure, that the person who asked a question has in mind. So it's hard to respond without knowing that. So if the person wants to type more, it will be helpful.
Yeah, I wouldn't have much to add. I mean, you probably have not discovered your full audience. There might be something like that. Yeah.
And I could sense that, for instance, like I've been in smaller startup that the budget is limited and you have to focus. Right. So there could be some other reasons. But I think in those scenarios also, you could still always like think about diversity in some other ways. And it doesn't, maybe the case that Barbara described, that someone who has visibility issues could be like on the extreme side of it, right? And it may not apply to every product, every company, every kind of budget that you have for the project. But the point is, how could we really, as leaders, as designers, as product people, as people in different key roles, push the boundaries? I think that's the goal of the discussion. But depending on the business and size and budget, that could mean different things, right?
Beautiful. We have next a question from a fantastic designer I know called Marina. And Marina asks, sometimes we design mobile first. Would it make sense to also think accessibility first? And what would be the implications of thinking like that?
I think accessibility should be first always. I mean, it's a different perspective than mobile first, but if you there's a lot of things that have been written about it, and I would recommend to take a look at the World Wide Web Consortium. They have some standards that they suggest, so it could be a good start. It's not very different than what we usually do and how we usually start. What I've seen happen many times is that we have a good start and we think about contrast and all that, but when you start, when you send the screens or your UI or your product to other stakeholders and you start to hear a lot of feedbacks, then things just get lost at some point. So I think rather than just being accessibility first, is like to say accessibility always, like never forget that you're trying to build something that is for everyone to use. and use that as a argument when you are trying to make a point or defend a design or something.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Next is actually just a comment, and this is for all three of you, but particularly for Leslie. Bruno says, you're all making great points regarding diversity, and I specifically loved what Leslie pointed out about the importance of going beyond inclusion and achieving a sense of belonging. Thank you, Bruno. And then last question that I have here is from Andressa, and Andressa is addressing this one for Barbara. So what would you say to women who aspire to reach board positions?
Don't give up. Find other women that can help you, that can mentor you. Study a lot, read all the books that people are reading. It's not an easy path. I'm not gonna say to you it's easy, but there are many positions available, and we need to be there. We need to get there. Study. Make new connections, go to events, put yourself out there.
Great. Yasi or Leslie, anything you'd like to add there?
No, well, just picking up Barbara's last line about putting yourself out there. So like this year has been my year of yes. So I am doing everything, but it's really like in that space of taking creative risks and doing, putting myself out there.
Beautiful. All right, I think it's time for us to wrap up. And so I just want to ask final thoughts, for each of you, if we can leave the listeners today with one thing that they can do on an individual level to help support and challenge the designers and storytellers in their lives, what is that one thing that we can do to empower them? Leslie, I'll start with you since I know you have a hard stop right at the end of the hour.
So my challenge is build a relationship with someone who's different to you. That's, one little challenge. How are you going to make this relationship with difference, communicate across difference?
Great.
That's it, yeah.
That's great advice. That's where it all begins. Barbara.
I would say believe in yourself, believe in each other. It's not only about you, it's about how everyone can get a seat at the table and can get a share.
Great. Yasi.
Have compassion for yourself and for others.
Beautiful. And the last thing that I will add is to not be afraid to keep asking why. Be like that little kid. This is, but why? But why? But why? Because sometimes you get to unbury something that was a deep assumption that doesn't have to be the way that it was. All right. Thank you so much to each of you. Thank you for everyone that joined the discussion, and hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. It was really wonderful learning from the three of you. So thank you again so much for your willingness to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.